Welcome. You're listening to the Good Girls Don't podcast with Ashley Ray
and Verity Mansfield.
This is the podcast where we smash those rules that we've been taught to follow both as men and women and burn the damn rule book. We're tackling the big issues and the issues nobody wants to talk about, and we'll be fiercely feminist about it.
This podcast is about inspiration, education, compassion, and being the change that you need to see in this world. This podcast is for the trailblazers, the freedom fighters, and the soul igniters, and all the women just like you who are ready to break the good girl rules and be heard.
We acknowledge the traditional custodians of Australia and its First Nations people on which this podcast is produced and consumed. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging.
Get ready for the revolution. It's coming to you now. It's coming to you now. We're gonna sing it, revolution. And they'll never bring us down. No, they'll never bring us down.
Welcome to another episode of the Good Girls Don't podcast. I am Ashley and I'm here with
Me.
me, who is me.
Verity Mansfield.
That's better. And we have a really kind of grim topic to talk about today that I'll be honest, I had some serious issues with.
Yeah, we're
because-
pretty worried we're both going to burst into tears, but we did pretty well.
Yeah, we did pretty well. And today we're going to talk about the topic of death and dying, particularly with children with life-limiting conditions. So brace yourself for it's a beautiful conversation, but that doesn't mean it's not tough as well. And
Yeah,
we
it
spoke.
was a really gorgeous conversation. And I think that was one of the points about the whole thing was, we should be having these conversations because it helps to actually normalize death. And Ashley and I were saying that for a long period of time, death has been such a massive part of society, in terms of, past plagues or, the lack of medicine, or we used to have, 6, 7 babies because we accepted that not all of them would survive, or just even, in terms of wars like World War I and World War II, we had to be I don't want to say at peace with death, but we had to accept that death was a common event. And now in society, it seems like death is taboo. Like it's something we don't talk about. It's something we don't really experience. And people can get to, 40 years of age without even experiencing anyone dying around them.
I find that such a strange concept. But I know
Yeah.
that there are people who never know people who die. So we sat down with a palliative care nurse, specifically working with children, and we asked her questions about, well, all of the things. And before we get into actually what we talked about, we should let you know who we spoke to and why they're just a rock star of a human being.
Yes. So we spoke to Andrea Coe, who is from Hummingbird House in Queensland, which is a children's only hospice. And, they provide this home away from home for children and their families, that have a child with a life-limiting condition. And it's really beautiful. They care for children, from birth up through the age of 18. And they continue to support those families with either, a short break stay in moments of crisis, symptom management care, and, especially at that period of time where, the life is ending and after death care. And it's such a beautiful service. And we're going to try and find links for at least one in every state as well, because I think it's so important that not only do we talk about this, but we support these charity-based organisations. They don't get a lot of funding. They are charities, and they do require the services and support of the communities around them to keep them going and providing these much needed services for families all over Australia.
Exactly. And it was such an amazing conversation. Genuinely, we were like bracing ourselves for ugly crying.
And there wasn't any.
There wasn't any. It was actually a really delightful conversation and a really
We held it
beautiful one.
together.
We'll go cry later. But some of the things that we did talk about with Andrea were things like, the financial accessibility of services like a children's hospice, how you get referred to one, how other cultures deal with death, and whether that's better or not, or what it is, I suppose.
Yeah.
And
we also, talked about that whole grieving process. And also Andrea, brought up this really beautiful thing about, why it's important that we understand that you don't get over grief, but that we learn to live and grow around grief. I really loved that.
yeah, and there was this other amazing point that really stuck out for me, which was around the importance of community and inclusivity when it comes to death, especially where a child's concerned.
Yeah. And the importance of that, and not being secretive around it. Um, it was just there's just so many beautiful points that Andrea, raised from her experience of dealing with so many families. And, even that there's no wrong or right way to grieve the loss of a child either, and that everyone grieves at their own rate, and that needs to be respected.
Yeah, it really was absolutely beautiful. So please just be mindful, like it is a tough topic of who else might be around when you're listening, but we really hope that you enjoy this and that this does open up some really beautiful discussions, maybe between you and your partner or other family members about their wishes and what's happening there.
Yeah.
And
it's actually a really
yeah.
beautiful way to talk about death and to normalize it. And we hope that you do take this conversation back to your family table and talk about death, and encourage, because there's one thing that Andrea raised as well, was that she found the children that dealt better in coping and processing their own death were children whose parents led those conversations and weren't afraid to talk about death. And that was, that's really kind of stuck with me, that we are the role models for our families and for our children, and how we feel about something quite often gives guidance to our children on how they should or shouldn't feel about something as well.
Yeah.
And, we just want to express gratitude as well so much for Andrea. She's a paediatric palliative care nurse practitioner. She's UK trained children's nurse that moved to Australia with a young family about 13 years ago. And she does have teenage children, which makes it even a more fascinating conversation. She has extensive nursing experience in caring for children, in working in the emergency department, general paediatric wards, oncology, and now in paediatric, I didn't even say, did I say that properly? Pediatric palliative care. And
She
really
knows her
grateful.
stuff.
I kind of do. She knows her stuff. Yeah, I don't. But yeah, she's absolutely amazing too. And we're so grateful to Andrea from Hummingbird House.
We are. And if you want to take this another step further, I'd highly recommend, from my own personal experience, and this is what opened my eyes to death a little bit more, is on Netflix, watch The Casketeers. Maybe it's on YouTube, I'm not sure, but that's also a really beautiful way of opening up your ideas and thinking around death and dying, and it really celebrates Pacific Islander culture as well. So it's beautiful, it is funny, and it's also sad, but that's what beautiful is.
Yeah.
So we really hope that you enjoy this conversation and you find it as uplifting and joyful as we did. Welcome to the Good Girls podcast, Andrea. How are you going today?
Thank you. I'm very well. How are you?
We're very excited to speak about this.
I don't know if I'm excited.
It's not excitement. It's
interesting.
It's trepidation about a very grim topic.
Oh.
We're passionate to talk about it. We'll put it that way. But
Good.
yeah, I mean, you're here to talk to us today about, I guess, how we cope with death, but especially death around children. And Ashley doesn't have children, but she's very close to her younger siblings. And I have two daughters. who are 10 and 13, and it is absolutely my absolute worst nightmare to have to watch one of my children die in front of me. I don't even know how to comprehend what a mother, father, parent, caregiver must go through, what that child must be going through, what the family needs to go through, and even the surrounding community, the greater community, the extended family, the work colleagues, the friends of the family, the children of the friends of the family. Like,
all of the people.
It's just something, I mean, and none of us really talk about it. None of us know what to say about it. None of us know how to, like, if it happens to us, what do we need to be aware of? How the hell do we cope about it? How do we release this fear of it? But then also, if we witness other people going through it, like, how the hell do we know what to do? And I think there's so much silence around it because of the fear we have of, making it worse for that family. But it often kind of ends up feeling very disconnected for people who are grieving death. And I've lost parents. I've lost a stepmother and my father. And I've lost ex-lovers. I've witnessed a lot of people dying, and people, my perspective is we're not a society that's comfortable with death. We don't know how to deal with it. We don't know how to process it. We don't know how to support people going through it. And so everyone shuts up. And it can be very, very horrible, lonely, and even worse and more traumatic experience because of that disconnection. So that's why we have you here today to help us all.
Thank you.
Because in spite of all of that uncomfortableness, you work with this all the time.
Yeah. I think, first of all, I really need to say that so I can talk to you guys, and I'm really happy to share things that we have learned from our families that we care for, but this is not a personal experience for me. So I have 2 children. Thank goodness they're both alive and well. So I can't say that this is what it feels like to have a child that dies.
Yeah.
But what I can talk about definitely is how we as a society look at death, and how, from my opinion and from what I see, how we deal with death as a whole, and then also how we can support families through that, and as professionals working in hospice, like what it might look like for somebody when they're dying, and how we can support families. And the most important thing, I think, is just to share what families teach us, because I feel like every single day, and it's not an exaggeration, I come into work and I'm just so honoured to be able to work with the families that I work with, and the strength, and they're just amazing, our family. So yes, I can certainly share what they've taught me, because I feel like I learn a lot from them. So whilst I'm an experienced nurse practitioner and I've worked with children for 23 years, I'm certainly not the expert in other people's children. They are the experts in that. So everything that I can talk about is from what I've learned from families, I suppose.
Of course. And I've heard other palliative care nurses say the same thing, that it is it's an honour to bear witness and be part of this really, a momentous thing. And it's just incredible. So just a question that I have is, how did you fall into this career? Because it seems to me, from someone who has almost nothing to do with death, there are some people, like in high school, people knew that they wanted to be a doctor or a nurse. Nobody I knew woke up and said, I want to work with dying people.
Dying children.
Yeah.
I did not think that when I was 8 and I knew I wanted to be a nurse. So I think looking back at my life, I've always wanted to be a nurse. And I do sometimes wonder, and that was definitely shaped by family. And so my mum had wanted to be a nurse, and in those days you could be a nurse if you're going to get married, so she wasn't able to do it. And then her mum, which was my gran, she wanted to be a nurse, but she grew up in quite a lot of poverty, and in those times it just was not easy for women particularly to work. And so she also wanted to be a nurse, and she was a cleaner on the maternity ward, and she saw kind of a lot of lovely things then. So I think it's always kind of been in the back of my mind that it's a family thing to be a nurse, even though nobody else was. So I just always thought I wanted to be a nurse or a teacher. maybe an actress at one point, but I stepped back from that. So
I think we all have that dream at one point.
Yeah, no, not my fortress. Anyways, so I decided I wanted to be a nurse, and then from really, and in the UK, how you train is you either choose that you want to be an adult nurse or a children's nurse, or a mental health nurse, or a learning disability nurse, and I always wanted to be a children's nurse. So hence I went in to do my children's nursing. And so this was like the late 90s. And then I suppose it was just more about where I could get a job. And I first worked in an emergency department as the emergency departments were growing how they care for children. And so I worked in an adult hospital with a specialised emergency type unit. So I worked in that. And in amongst that, whilst we wouldn't get children who have been in a traumatic experience, so we wouldn't get the children who came through and who had died in a car crash, for example, or who needed resuscitation because they'd been in a car crash, and we didn't get trauma. What we did get was children who needed kidney transplants, and children, a big one of what we did was children who had a cancer diagnosis, so they belonged to the oncology team. They would come to us for some support. And so kind of I was around that from the very beginning of my career. And then I did that for a year, and then I moved on the children's cancer board.
Yeah, I suppose if you go into medicine, you are going to be surrounded by, really tough situations, including
definitely
death.
But I definitely think that it's different with children. So certainly with adults, it's normal progression that you get older and you die. Certainly with children, that's definitely not, but any of us think it's normal. And so I just kind of found myself in cancer care, and I absolutely loved it. And I felt like as a junior nurse without children at that time, that I could be this really excellent nurse. And I did, we worked with teenagers with cancer, and I loved the little babies. And so I just kind of sat with that for a little bit. And then I did lots of other things, but I moved on and had my own children. And then we came to Australia. And again, I went back to cancer nursing after I had my kids. And then I suppose things that I saw in cancer nursing, and it's not a criticism of the system, because the system is what it is and it's very different from a hospice, but things that I saw about families having children who were going through end of life didn't sit very well with me. So there was a lot of at that time, and it definitely has changed over the last few years, there's a lot of pressure to move children on, and once they died it was a matter of just getting them out of the hospital. That has changed, but I suppose that really framed my idea of wanting to do better when children die. And then I did other things. I worked in general paediatrics, and then Hummingbird House opened, and we're the only children's hospice in Queensland, so it's a really unique place to work. And when they were open, they didn't have a role for a nurse practitioner, and about 6 months later then they did have a role for a nurse practitioner, and so I applied and came here. So I kind of feel like in my career I've gone full circle. So at the very beginning, I've been a nurse 23 years, but at the very beginning I worked with children who were dying with cancer, then I did lots of other things, and then I came back. I'm not saying that I'm at the end of my career, but I've got lots of experience between now and then, so I feel like I've come full circle and landed in it. And I think, to be really clear, in palliative care for children is quite different from palliative care for adults. Yeah. And so usually when you get referred to palliative care, and especially if you get referred to a hospice as an adult, you're looking that you might have 3 to 6 months prognosis, so you would be expected to die within 3 to 6 months.
As an adult?
As an adult. But as a child, you can have a palliative care diagnosis, so you can have a life-limiting condition and actually still live for quite a few years, like many years. So it's not necessarily, if you have a palliative diagnosis as a child, that you're really going to die within a couple of months. Of course, we definitely see that. And so what we do here is have children who are with us and they visit the hospice for support for over many years. And then we also have another cohort of children who come specifically for end of life care, and they can be with us, for hours to days to weeks, actively dying. And then we provide after death care for that family as well.
I've got to ask the question, what is actively dying?
So children who, so there's no further hopes for a cure, for any treatment. So a child who we know, for example, a child who has a complex cardiac condition, and there's no surgical options for that, and they've tried all the treatment, or they know from birth that there's literally nothing they can do. And so the child's heart is not going to support the body. And often those children will live for hours to days, sometimes 2 weeks and sometimes longer, but in this position, so they would come to us for supportive care, and they are not expected to live longer than hours to days, and so they are actively dying while they're here. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So this is the pointy end of the stick.
Yeah, and I do think, and I do think you're right when you said at the beginning, like I do this every day, so then sometimes it becomes second nature. Certainly doesn't become blasé about it, but it becomes second nature. So it's definitely worth clarifying if I'm saying terms that you just like you're really not sure.
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense, and that's beautiful. So the people who come and use it, I'm not sure what the right term here is, your clientele, customers, users.
So we have guests. So we have guests in care. Yeah. And that's very deliberate because they're a guest in our house. So Hummingbird House is a hospice, but it's a house. It's a beautiful big house and they're purpose built, but they come and they are guests in our space. So we have guests in care.
Yeah, I love your language because it really makes it feel like it's not a clinical kind of medical thing. And even, you have on your website, Hummingbird House is a place where kids can be kids, families can reconnect, and precious memories can be created. And that is so important when you know that, a child has a time limit on their life. What more could a family possibly want than their kids to have a space to be a kid, to connect, have that family connection as much as possible.
And also parents being able to be parents. And so from the kids who have a long-term disability and life-limiting condition, what our families tell us, they have been the carer for that child for a number of years. And, the mom and dad have been the nurse and the pharmacist and the teacher and the taxi driver and just all the things, complex things that come with caring for these really precious children. And then when they come here, we can do quite a lot of that for them. So we can give them medications and the feeds, and we can help with the bathing and the hoisting and, in the feed and everything we can do. And then the parent actually can just sit and be a mum or a dad. And that's really important. I feel like that's a gift that we can give to our families. Yeah.
And so in terms of the kids being kids, are there programs or activities that the children get involved with that are provided that allow them to have that fun back in their
Definitely, yeah. So I think there's a misnomer that when you come into a hospice, it's a really sad place and it feels really quite serious and people talk in hushed tones, and that is certainly not what we find here. It's really quite a joyous and uplifting place, I think, and that's certainly what families tell us. And there's lots of laughter, and so it kind of, the tears and the laughter go alongside each other often, and even in really times of grief, and certainly even after a child has died, remembering that child fondly and being able to laugh about that's really important. So to take a step back to answer your question, so we have an art therapist that works with us. We also have access to music therapy. We also have access to hydrotherapy, so our children can have hydrotherapy with a physiotherapist. So they're kind of therapy based, but lots and lots of fun. But generally as well, we have a beautiful craft space where kids can do craft. We've got an amazing backyard. So even simple things like being able to sit outside in Queensland, really lucky, under the shade in summer, and hear the water. We've got a water feature, so hear the water and the birds and being out in the trees, and then have a picnic in the backyard, or going down the slide that we've got, or on the multi-purpose swing. All of those things are quite normal child behaviours. And then because we are so close to the shopping centre, the Westfield shopping centre, there's a move, the cinemas there, and often our families will say they don't really have a chance to go to the movies, and so they'll be able to take the siblings there, and sometimes they're guests in care as well, and then coffee shops and go out for meals and all of that, and kind of what we would view as normal.
It's just normal
life.
Return to them.
Yeah. And I guess that's so important what you were just saying there as well, so that the child that is having this limited life experience is getting cared for, which then enables the other members of the family to go meet their own needs, and especially if there's other siblings involved, that other sibling is able to have some of their parents' attention, that they're just not the sibling of a the
child with a disability sometimes,
or whatever it is, that they can kind of have their needs tended to, and have some life, so sense of life, a sense of self back, instead of everything revolving around the one sort of the child with the illness. I want to say the dying child. It makes me feel like I want to cry.
That's beautiful.
It's so many amazing layers of what I guess.
There really is. It's very different. Even coming from a nursing perspective, it's very different, really, the reality to what I expected. You know, when you're living it all the time with families, yeah, it's a lot of joy.
So I want to ask, I mean, this sounds beautiful, and the house looks beautiful. We've seen the photos,
Yes.
and it does. Genuinely, I would like to stay there because it's just a beautiful looking house. There's so much natural light. It's so much colour. It looks like a kid's paradise. But how do people actually access the service of Hummingbird House? So are there something I'm really curious about and something I'm very passionate about is people being able to access things like the NDIS. And I'm curious, does that come into play with Hummingbird?
Yeah, so to be eligible for our services, you need to be referred by a clinician or a professional that's involved in your care. So currently at this point, families don't self-refer, but sometimes definitely what has happened, families have called and said, I'd be really interested in Hummingbird House, how can I get a referral? And it's often, you know, their main doctor or nurse that they work with from like a rehab team or a GP or metabolic team at the big hospitals. Or a social worker or a teacher or any of those things, so you could be referred. You have to for children to be accepted into our care, you have to meet a certain criteria that we have set that's based on guidelines, international guidelines for accessing palliative care. And then we also have a specific remit, I suppose, where we talk about children who are the most vulnerable. And so would we be surprised if your child will die within 2 years? And if the answer is no, then that's much more likely to be able to meet our criteria. So we look after children who are palliative, but who are really kind of at that pointy end of the diagnosis, I suppose. But of course, like, kids trick us all the time, you know, because they can be really super fragile and then, you know, they bounce back a little bit and, you know, and which is great. Yeah.
Super resilient sometimes, aren't they?
Yeah, that's right. And just in regards to the NDIS, so we do have children who are on NDIS packages, and so they can use that government funding that they've got to access hydrotherapy here as an extra, I suppose, to what we do. And then also, if they have some NDIS funding for overnight care, then they can actually use that to
so they can come in as a like very short-term respite.
Correct, respite, yeah, correct. And what that actually does is that's helpful for us as well, because we are a charity, so we have some government funding, but we need to raise 1.8 million every year to be able to run the service. And so so we're a charity, so the NDIS funding that we get is really helpful to be able, so that we can then continue to offer a free charity. So there's no cost to any family that comes to us. If they've got NDIS money and they'd like to use it for short break stays, so they can certainly do that.
I mean, that's amazing. Incredible. And I understand I've got a partner with an NDIS package.
So like, how do we...
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. So what happens actually then in the process? Like, how do you help parents to go through the grieving process of one, accepting the child's diagnosis, of two, the actual moment that a child is passing? Like, how do you provide, how does one even help parents go through that and make peace with that?
I think that's a really tricky question, because and I'll try my best to answer, but every single family is different, and so what works with one family doesn't work with the other. Yeah. So we are here, I suppose, as professionals and health professionals, and so we've got nurses on staff, and we've got personal care workers, we have some doctors that provide us with support as well. We have a family support team, which consists of a counsellor and social worker and really experienced art therapist and physiotherapist. So we've got this big support, and so we talk very much about walking alongside the family. So yes, we're experts in managing symptoms of the child that's dying, but we are not experts in that child, and we're also not experts in that family. So we walk alongside, and so we're often very much guided by the families themselves. What we see is to be one of the most important things for families is actually having support in the community. So having whoever's important to them to be involved with the child, and to even to be involved in end-of-life care and then post after death. Community support is really vital. We can support from a very practical sense, like giving them the space to be able to lie in the bed next to the child and hold the child's hand while we do the other things, like, give the medications and things. So really practically, we can provide space for the whole family to be together. So mom, dad, sibling, that is relevant for that family. We can provide them that practical space. We can feed them, do the laundry for them. They don't have to worry about cleaning the house and things. We can also welcome visitors for them, or sometimes if they want privacy, kind of safeguard that for them, so they've got privacy at that time. Yeah.
Is that
we
one
can
of the
do.
things, sorry, Andrea, is that one of the things then, by doing all of this other stuff for the family, does that in some way actually then create a safe space for them to process their emotions instead of avoiding them because they've got to do the laundry, they've got to do the washing up, someone's got to pick the other kid up from school, someone's got to, I don't know, like you said, administer medication, someone's got to check
I think so. I think so. I think it just gives them time to be really present. And just not to have to worry about other things. And, I think it's important to say that hospice is only one option for families. It's a brilliant option, of course, and I support that. So families can have children die at home, and in Queensland, we've got a paediatric palliative care service that supports that, and we work very closely in conjunction with them, so they can die at home. I think sometimes one of the big benefits of being in the hospice is that those things that I've described about giving space and not having interruptions, but also the real practical things, like if you've got quite a big child, and they're difficult to manoeuvre, that we can help with hoisting and we can help with personal cares and all of those things. If they're on really complex medications, we can help to manage that as well. And if pain is sometimes a bit tricky, instead of being at home and trying to manage that, you've always got somebody on the end of your line, particularly in Queensland, but actually we are just there right there and then, and we can look at the child as well. We work closely with the Paediatric Palliative Care Service, and we certainly are guided by their expertise as well. We work in partnership, certainly not in the silo.
I imagine that this is a service that really, like Verity said, I think creates the space for people to be properly present in the moment.
Yes.
And that's got to be important for
healing,
the grieving
and
process.
On. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So building on that, something that, Verity and I were talking about when we're like, okay, we're going to talk to Andrea. Oh God, this is hard. What do we want to know? And something that came up, at least for me, was the idea, I wonder, I know that this isn't going to be appropriate for all children because some of them are going to be quite young that you see, but for the ones who maybe are old enough, do they have a voice and a role in planning how they wish to die and also their funeral services?
Yeah, absolutely. We are guided by families and guided by the young people themselves, but there's a couple of things that we do. So sit down and have a conversation. Sometimes families ask us specifically to do that. Sometimes families just like us to give them guidance on the language that they can use and explaining that to a young person. And sometimes families will just do it themselves. And so we sometimes use a document called Voice in My Choices, and it's quite a good document for being able to write down, this is what I'm like, this is who is important to me when I'm really sick, this is who's really important to me when I'm dying, this is who I would like to be there after death, this is the clothes that I might like to wear. For example, if you've got any ideas of great music that you want at your funeral service, then you can write it down in this document. We have a similar document called Hopes and Wishes, which we can use with families and young people as well. So definitely the young person's voice is very present, and even if they are non-verbal or if they are little babies, we can often just get an essence of who they are and then build that into, say, a memorial, for example, or a funeral service, or just making that space that they're currently in really lovely.
I can't even imagine having that conversation with my child or asking, oh my God, like I can feel myself just thinking, oh my God, I don't want to know about it. I don't want to know about it. It's not.
That's exactly right.
You're so, conversation.
And you're so right, and that's exactly right. But what we do, like I said before, is walk alongside them. So I remember I had a conversation with a young person who, so he knew he was dying, he was really sick, and his family just wanted to talk about the wishes around, should he become really unwell, what did he want to happen? Did he want to be in ICU? Did he want to, have a tube down his throat, have a machine breathe from, etc.? And they just could not have that conversation alone. And so I sat with them and did that. And so I asked questions that was age appropriate and language that he could understand, so not medical speak. And we got an idea of what he wanted. And then I could then put on a document and then send that to ambulance service and the doctors, and then his parents just felt comfortable that they were really having his wishes really listened to.
It's amazing that they have so much of a voice in this, and I think it's so important because, I mean, for lack of a better way of putting this, young people are kind of steamrolled by a lack of voice and rights overall. Like, it's always do what the grown-ups say, and this is just such an amazing way of honoring that child's life. I'm curious to ask if any of those plans have really stood out to you, and maybe there's like a beautiful story, or maybe something that's made you laugh from any of the guests that you've worked with.
Look, I just always think there's a uniqueness in working with young people anyway, and kind of the things that you wouldn't, songs that you would think that would be appropriate at a funeral, and the parents are saying, oh my goodness, I do not want this song. For example, we had a young man who just loved this really vibrant football song, and they thought that'd be really relevant for his funeral, and then his parents were like, I'm not really sure, but it was important to him, so we had this really vibrant football song, typical English one, as he left the hospice. That was beautiful, and at his funeral as well. And I've just seen coffins decorated with like superheroes and crazy gamer things that I literally have no idea about, but it's really important for them. So it's hard to pick one story. We've had rainbows and butterflies and bright music and balloons and all sorts of things at children's memorials and in the room even after they've died. I suppose we're really lucky here to have such a beautiful space, and so we can have memorials on site, and just to be able to be witness to that is just a real honour and a privilege, and just to be able to support families with that. And we have had a number of services now underneath them. We've got a big mango tree at the bottom of the garden. It is in the pictures. We've got a big mango tree underneath at the bottom of the garden, and it's got quite a nice space for sitting in, and we've had quite a few funeral services under that tree. And so I think that's one of the things that's really stood out to me, that we can honour a child, a baby or a child or a young person's life and be in nature. And that's not something that I had really thought about before I worked in hospice. You kind of think of funerals as being in a church or a chapel, but it's really opened up my eyes, I suppose, to that. I think being in nature it's just been a real eye-opener and really important for families, and having this beautiful space.
Yeah, that's so incredibly beautiful.
That just makes me so happy.
But also in terms of like with the process of dying, what is it like? Do you find that children often cope better with the process than what their parents do, or do you find that sometimes it's when I look back and think about like my stepfather died, my dad died, and even like an ex-partner. But it felt for them that they found peace a lot quicker than they found peace with their death a lot easier and quicker than what I did. And I don't know whether children would do the same, whether it's kind of the thing where when people are passing, it's the people that get left behind that find it harder. Do children find it easier?
Maybe. I think it's tricky for children generally, because obviously, we take children from birth all the way up to 18, and also sometimes with different cognition. So I suppose, I think the age group that I find most challenging personally, and I'm not speaking for everybody, but just for myself, are the teenagers. And because you kind of think, they've just got so much life left, and also the same with the baby, but the teenager particularly, because often have got an understanding, especially in people with an oncology diagnosis or a heart condition, and that they thought would get better and it hasn't, or could be helped and it hasn't been. I suppose I find the teenagers harder because they do know what they're going to miss, maybe.
Because they're on that brink, can't they, of entering adulthood and everything.
Yeah, and all those exciting things that should be happening and now it's not happening. You know, I find that personally that's really tricky. I don't know whether that also though is as a clinician, because I have teenage children as well, and certainly throughout my career, things that hit you hard as a clinician certainly has been linked for me with ages of my children. And so I remember having the conversation with the young man that I talked about in regards to what he wanted at end of life, and then I had to drive up the highway and see my son play basketball, and they were the same age, and I sat in that basketball court with lots of other young people who were like 14, 15, 16, 17 playing basketball. I was like, oh, that's what he should be doing, and this is not what the opportunity's got. And that, I found that really difficult. You know, I cried on the highway as I went up, but, you know, I celebrate my child's life as well, but also felt very sad for him. I don't know whether children accept death more easily than adults. I don't know the answer to that. I think children are very much guided by the parents, from what I can see. And so sometimes if the parents are open and willing to talk, maybe it's a bit easier for the child. I'm not sure. I definitely say that we encourage open, honest communication with children in age-appropriate language, and then also really to reassure families that actually it's all right to show emotion, and you know it might be really sad, and it is really sad what's happening to you, and to shield children from that is sometimes not in their best interest, because you know they know that you're sad. Like, kids are really intuitive, and sometimes for a long time, for the whole of my nursing career, I've come across families who don't want to tell the children that, especially the young people, that they're dying, but actually as a nurse, when I talk to the children, they'll tell me that they know that they're dying. I don't say anything, but they give me that information back. And so it's often worse for children if they don't have a truth, if they don't know what's happening, because they imagine is worse than actually the reality. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I don't know whether children accept it more than adults. I think generally children are more accepting of life and changes than adults necessarily. I don't think that. I think we manage things like pain and distress and symptoms really well, and I'm sure that my adult colleagues do the same thing. So I think the children are comfortable and well cared for. And so I hope there's not fear around that.
Do you think that, why do you think it is that we are so uncomfortable with death? I mean, Ashley pointed out to me before we even recorded this that, you know, we used to live in a time where death was a daily experience, you know, where we didn't have all this medicine, where we didn't have hospitals, you know, women, you didn't expect all of your children. Like, one of the reasons we had so many children was because we didn't expect all of them to live.
Yeah, that's right.
Why do you think now that we're so fearful around death? Like, just from even your own perspective or what you've seen?
I think that's a really good question, and I think it's one that we try hard. Like, we think a lot about it in the hospice. That's what we've got an amazing family support manager, and he shared lots of wisdom with us. So some of the things that I say, like, I've definitely learned from him. He's been a grief counsellor and kind of sits in that space really well. And I know that so I'm 45, and my grandparents died within my lifetime. My great grandparents died within my lifetime. So, you know, when I was like a young person, like 9 and 10, I remember losing my grandfather's mother, I think it was, you know. So and I remember at that time, where we lived in the northeast of England, it was really public that this person had died, and everybody in the street knew that. I remember you know, all the curtains were drawn out of respect. It was a very English northeast type of thing. The person was laid out in the front parlour, I suppose, for want of a better word, and so people could come and visit, and it was just really open. We acknowledged it, and so that was even in my lifetime. And then I suppose a generation later, from what I can see with my parents, and then us, and then my children, I suppose it is just not talked about. And I don't know whether, because we've got excellent medical services and people are living longer, you're right, and you know, there are cures for things that we wouldn't have had cures before, even the fact that we've got antibiotics is amazing. I suppose it's kind of pushed to the back of our minds because we are expected to live long lives. We're expected to live, you would expect to live in the Western or a developed society that we live in, you would expect to live till 90 to 100. You know, that's my grandmother, my gran lived until she was 91, and that's what I expect. I would expect that for myself. I would expect that for my children. So trying to face the fact that that doesn't happen is really scary. I can sit here and I can talk to families and I can talk to young people about them dying. To have that conversation with my own child is really difficult, and I sit in this space all the time. So I see death all the time, and I see children dying, and I do the after death and I do the grief management. Even for me, that's difficult to have the conversation. I've had that conversation with my kids, and it was really tricky. In fact, my 16-year-old brought that to me. What would you do if I died? And I'm not sure if I'd like to be buried and cremated. And I was like, whoa, where is this coming from? But of course, I suppose they know what they do, and I don't talk about death around the desk. I still around the dining table, but I still talk about death, and they still know that I work with a child who's died, and they still know if I've been to a funeral that day, or if I've had a really bad day. That's it was a really tricky day today, and this person that I cared for has died, so they know that. I think that we're very fearful of it, and I think it's a generational thing, and we are definitely trying to encourage people to talk, which is why it's brilliant to talk about it now, because it is a reality, and people do die, and if we don't as a society deal with it, then that can be damaging for us as a society. Ostracize people who have suffered from losing a child or losing a parent,
Yeah, it's funny because my children, I think it's really cute because they'll often talk about their grandfather that's passed away, and I had a miscarriage a couple of years ago, and my youngest daughter, and I think we've talked about this in another podcast, my youngest daughter is very open about it, and she'd be like, oh, we should go celebrate, our dead sister's birthday. And it kind of cracks me up. And sometimes I feel that, oh my God, people are going to think we're nuts. Like all of those kind of, insecurities or fears that other people think will fly up. And then at the same time, I just think, oh my God, I'm so blessed to have children who are willing to have, they don't even see it as a difficult conversation.
No, that's right.
They're so accepting of it. They have their own ideas about it. And then I'm forcing almost my ideas that aren't as great onto them. And sometimes I think,
don't talk about it. Yeah.
I really got to learn off my children.
Yeah. But kids are like that generally, though, aren't they? I mean, we even see kids here, especially really little ones, like 3 or 4 year olds who will be with the family, and they will know that their sibling has died, and we encourage siblings to be involved in that process as much as they can, and they'll be really sad in that moment, and they'll know that the sibling has died, and they'll be sad and crying and kiss the sibling, and then they'll just walk out the room and they'll be playing in the backyard and down the slide and things, and that's how children process it. And I think that we have a lot to learn from kids, and families find that quite confronting, like, oh, what's the matter, she's not crying all the time, but that's not how children do.
Yeah, I also remember having a conversation with this lady who was probably in her 70s, and her 40-year-old son had passed away, and they'd had a bit of a turbulent relationship, and I remember her saying to me, is it wrong that I don't feel guilty that he's passed away? And she kind of expected all of these, she had these assumptions and preconceived ideas of what she should feel.
Yeah.
And when it didn't happen, she was just like, well, hang on a second, that's not what
is anything the matter with me?
Feel.
Yeah.
Am I allowed to have fun? Am I allowed to acknowledge that he's at peace, and I'm actually happy that they're at peace.
Yeah, and relieved.
These really conflicting emotions.
It's crazy, isn't it? Because I remember a mum saying to me, how can I, so her child had died, and how can I go to the supermarket, and how can I get up in the morning and still live, and felt guilt because they could do that, because they felt like they owed the child more. But also you still have to move, you still have to breathe, and you still have to eat, and you still have to care for your other children and your husband and society as a whole, I suppose. And so there's these ideas that you should be doing this, and this, and the 7 stages of grief or whatever it is, that you should be working through it. But actually that's not what we've seen. That's not what our experience is. And some people are real doers, and they just like to plan the funeral, and then they need to get back to work, and they need to decorate the house and do all of the things, and that's fine. And then other people and then other people just need to just sit and have time and do things very slowly, and might never ever want to go back to work again, and that totally change their life, and that's also fine. And even things like being really sad one day and really, really not being able to get out of bed and really emotional, and then the next day not feeling like that, that's also fine as well. And there's lots of books on grief, but there's just, people don't experience it the same way. You know, people never experience it the same way, and it's different for everybody, and just allowing that to be is really important. And today I'm having a really bad day and tomorrow's another day, you know. And we talk about, you always have this grief, this terrible thing has happened, your child has died, it's dreadful, and at first, I suppose it's the same with anybody that's died, at first it is all consuming and overwhelming, and then eventually over months, years and years, what happens is the grief is still there because it's still real, you grow around it, and so you kind of grow and learn to live with it. So there's a big thing that says time heals, and that's, you know, that's not always the case. Everybody's different, and you kind of put a time limit on it. No, and I think it's probably a really good friend of mine's husband died quite suddenly, unexpectedly. You know, in their late 60s, but still a husband, and she loved him dearly, and they'd been together many, many years, had children, and a really, really important relationship, and they loved each other a lot. And it was so sudden, and she had people say to her 6 months down the line, you should be over it now. You should be able to go out and do this, and this. You should be able to come out with us for a meal. And she's like, I just can't do it. You know, I just can't do it. And then even a year later and 2 years later, she's still in a very different place to, for example, my dad, whose wife died, loved my mum dearly. You know, they had a great relationship, but he has dealt with things very differently. He became really active and travelled the world and did all the things that he couldn't do as a carer for my mum, I suppose, whereas my friend just has had a very different experience with grief.
It's so unique.
Neither's right or wrong.
It's
I
so
think
unique.
that's the thing, isn't it? We can't have that idea that something's right or something's wrong. Like, there's no right way or perfect way or proper way to grieve, and there's no bad way or wrong way to do it either.
I think an interesting thing that we see as well is that grief is seen sometimes, not with everybody, grief is seen almost as a form of mental illness. And, oh my goodness, you're grieving, you're really sad, so you need to go to your GP, you need to get some medication. But actually, grief is a really normal response to having somebody that you absolutely adore die. And yes, some children, some families and parents may need to have some medical support. But generally, we find that that's not the case, and especially with families who community is really important, and they've got people looking out for them, and they've got good support from the community. What we find is that from some research, when a person dies and their family are there, when they've been interviewed and they're looking at who is the most important to you during your grief journey? Who's the most important people? It's actually not people like me, who's the nurse practitioner or the paediatric, you know, the specialist. It's the person that is there for them, that is the neighbour down the road, or the cousin that they're really close to, or it's not even necessarily the mum or the dad or the husband. Sometimes it's that those people that have identified and surrounded them as they really need it. And I do think that is sometimes as a society, like we've said before, is actually that sometimes doesn't happen. And I remember one mum saying she had a 15-year-old and that child died. And I remember at the funeral she said, and there was a lot of the schoolmates were there, and she said, you know, I am still this person's mum, and I still want you to say, oh, hi, young person's mum, hi, rather than cross over the road and avoid her. And I think it is really important to say the name of the child and not to avoid talking about them. And I hear that time and time again. It's just like, this awful, terrible, crappy thing has happened to me, and you might not know what to say, but just to be there and to be able to say, I'm so sorry that that's happened, and it's really sad that Jack or Sophie or whoever has died. It's really sad. I'm really sad for you, and I'm sorry. Full stop. You know, you don't need to have massive words of wisdom, and often, you know, like we don't. It's just being there and being really totally present, and just avoiding.
Yeah, just the acknowledgement that their child existed and that their grief exists, and not trying to avoid it or kind of sweep it under the carpet. But that acknowledgement, kind of allowing the family to be witnessed. for what they're
And
going
I think
through.
also as well, I think it is important. I think what you said earlier was really important. And really, I thought about it a lot about the ripple effect for communities. And I think it's also really important to acknowledge that when a child dies in our community, specifically a child dies in our community, it actually affects us as a community. And, you know, even if it's been a child that I didn't know very well, or I didn't even know, and they've died in my local community, I'm really sad about that, you know, and I watch the news and I cry because it's really sad. And also to acknowledge that as a community, that's sad as well. And especially if it's been a family member and you are trying to support your daughter or your sister whose child has died, to acknowledge that actually that's really hard for you as well. And so you sometimes just to sit with that, you know, and just have a cup of tea and just reflect on that. I do remember one of my friends' husbands died young and suddenly, and they'd only just been married and had a really little baby, and it was absolutely awful. And what she said to me at the time was, I'm really struggling because our friends are coming to the house and they are distraught and crying, and then I'm using my energy to comfort them. Well, actually, I just need to cry myself. So I think there's definitely time and place for that, but also for the person that's grieving to be then having to comfort you is a difficult situation for them as well. So yes, be sad and cry and acknowledge it, but
you've got to take responsibility for your emotions.
Yeah,
so that the person whose child it is, but that they're
getting comfort from you. Yeah, and you're not. Yeah, and not spending all the energy comforting you. And I mean, I think it changes over kind of the time. So at the time when I was really raw, she couldn't deal with that. But then moving on, you know, there's a collective grief, I suppose. You know, and it's all right to be really sad on birthdays or what would have been the first day at school or whatever. Anniversary is important. And I think that's another thing as well, is that remembering anniversaries if you can.
Yeah.
And not only things like Mother's Day and Father's Day and Christmas, but for example, a birthday, but also if they were going to have a big event, like something like that, or like that would have been the first day at school. You know, if they were going to graduate, what would have been the graduation, like things like that, remembering that and just even acknowledging that's really important as well, from what we can see. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember a few years ago sending a really close friend of mine had lost her baby, and I remember a year later sending her a birthday child for her daughter who'd passed away, but just to say that, you know, I remember, like, I'm still celebrating her, and I'm still sending her love, and she's still in my life. We were
and she's still important.
Country. Yeah, she's important to me, even though she's not my child. She's still important to me. I know she existed, and I'm acknowledging that. And I remember we had that conversation, and she just said, "Oh my God, that means the world to me. Like my own family can't talk about it; it's too hard for them." And she said, "You know, sometimes I feel like everyone's forgotten her." So that it really is. It really drove it home for me how important it is for the community to not sweep things under the rug, but just to reach out at times and just say, hey, I remember.
Yeah. I think that's really important, and I think that's what we can learn from each other, and that's definitely what I learned from the families, is actually just acknowledging it's terrible and I'm really sorry for you, and what can I do to help, you know, or can I do this to help?
Yeah. Have you come across, just with your experiences and living in 2 countries, have you come across other cultures that maybe deal with death better, or things that we could learn to deal with it better?
Yeah, definitely. So in where we particularly are in Queensland, we have a lot of like Pacific Island cultures here, and obviously our own Aboriginal culture as well in this area. And from my experience with those cultures, it seems to be much more accepting of death, but also acknowledging death and being open about it and welcoming everybody. And I've certainly seen that, as particularly with the Islander communities, where it's not secret, it's not hidden, it's not just mum and dad and the children, it's the whole community. And I've even had families who have had a child that's died, they've been in this strong Christian faith that's linked to the Samoan culture, and they've even had people come and visit them that might not have known the child, but to pay respect, and that was really honouring for them, because then they could see that this child had been so important, like we talked about, to the whole community. So I certainly think that from what I've experienced and what I've seen, is the Islander culture tends to be much more open and acknowledging around death, and welcoming everybody in to experience that collective grief.
Yeah.
Wow.
Collective grief. It's so important,
Yeah.
isn't it? I think that's the thing, the collectiveness
Yeah.
of the grief, that we know that we're not alone in that moment, and that
Yeah.
what we're experiencing is real, and having it witnessed.
Yes,
Witnessed
that's
by
right.
community,
Yeah.
and knowing that we're not alone.
Yeah. 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 And certainly, even, you know, I mean, you know, we talked about specific cultures, but I suppose even we see differences community to community, and, you know, we've seen communities rally around families, and even when they get the diagnosis of being really unwell, we've seen amazing community support. And it's not only about the GoFundMe and fundraising, because that's also important for some families. It's about the practicality of, actually, while you've been in hospital for such a long time, and then, you know, your child has died, we have put your lawn for you, you know, or we've walked your dog, or there's real practical things, like real practical help, or we've cooked you a meal so that when you come home you don't have to cook for days, you know,
That's
you can
just
feel
beautiful.
supported. Yeah, and so communities generally, hopefully, will pull together. Yeah, but I think the important thing is that it's not a secret. For some families, they're really private, and that's the right thing for them. But for lots of families, it's just nice to know that there's some support out there.
That's absolutely beautiful. And I don't have the words, but I just, you know, I know what it means for, you know, my partner has an NDIS package, and I know how much that support means for us, and we're not terminally ill. So I can empathize and understand how much it's going to mean for these families to have simple things like someone just to make you a cup of tea, or cook you something, and not worrying about the vacuuming and the laundry. Like, it's so meaningful. There's so much depth there, and it really is care and kindness.
Yeah.
And it's absolute. I think it's one of the best things about services like Hummingbird House. It's just an amazing show of what it is to be a kind, caring human being.
I hope so. Yeah, hope so.
I think it's absolutely brilliant. We do have to wrap this up so that you can get to your meeting, but before we do, I want to ask, like, where we can, are there different ways that members of the public can be supportive of Hummingbird House or similar places in their local areas?
Yes, I think just raising awareness that we're here. So there are 3 children's hospices in Australia. So there's us here in Queensland, so we're Hummingbird House. In Sydney, there's Bear Cottage, and in Melbourne, there's Very Special Kids. And I think just being aware that we're here and that we're providing support for families through thick and thin. So through COVID, you know, we've still provided support for families, and, you know, when things are really difficult financially, I suppose we are still here, and we still, in Hummingbird House, we do not charge families for the service. So I suppose just raising awareness, and of course, community awareness is really important, and having community events is really important. And it's not, of course, if you've got money to donate and you can do a corporate sponsor, then that's very helpful. But it's also just about being aware of us and raising and sharing our website and sharing our Facebook pages, and just being engaged as a community with your local hospice. I think it's really important, and just being aware of your local families as well, and becoming engaged, if you can, with things like compassionate friends and compassionate communities, and just really having a community focus, I think, is important too, and getting back to that kind of how we used to live, where you knew your neighbours and all of those things. And I think that's important. But yeah, thank you for acknowledging that with Hummingbird House particularly. It's really helpful, and I think it's helpful for us really just to talk about death and to normalise it, and it's helpful for our families, for us to do that. The families that we look after, it's helpful for them, for us as a community to have these conversations, because the more people that can hear conversations like this will step into that space rather than stepping out of that space with families, regardless of whether it's a child that's died or a partner or a mother or a uncle, or whatever grief there is, that we will just step forward and embrace it rather than backing off, which is why just even having this conversation is really excellent.
Yeah, and sometimes it's being really honest and just saying to the person, I'm so sorry about your loss. I don't know what to say. Instead of just being silent, you can just be honest enough just to say to the person, I have no idea what to say.
Yeah, or just totally withdrawing, which some families do. I mean, I had personal experience when my mum got very sick, and also when my mum died. People that we thought would be there that just weren't there. And I rationally understood it, because I know that it was difficult to deal with my mum becoming very sick, especially when she was fairly young and then dying. But actually, that's not what we needed as a family. Like, we just needed our support in our community. And it's really interesting in those times who does step up, and it might be the person that you never really expect. So we've gained a lot from that as well, and we lost a lot as well as a family.
Wow, this is amazing, this conversation. I could listen to you talk about your profession.
You can understand the accent.
Thank you so much, Andrea.
Thank you, ladies.
And giving us an hour of your time. I know how precious your time is, especially for the work that you do. We're just really, really grateful to be able to have this conversation and just to bring more awareness to death, especially around families who have children who are, expecting a limited life span, because it is a really tough conversation to have. And, also just be able to help to raise awareness for children's hospices like Hummingbird House, because it just sounds so needed, especially in a society that has a lot of fear around death. So thank you so much for your time.
You are welcome, anytime.
And your knowledge, we really greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, and thanks for giving us the opportunity. It's been really nice.
Hey, if you want to continue this conversation, head over to our Facebook page and be part of the revolution. You can find us at Good Girls Don't Podcast on Facebook. Please note, we cannot create change alone. Your support, likes, comments, shares, and iTunes reviews help us to give a voice to the insanely inspirational women and the controversial issues that we discuss.
If you'd like to be a part of our podcast, or if you have an issue that you have a burning desire for us to bring into the light, please contact us. With fierceness, Ashley
and Verity.
Get ready for the rain.